Stand up. You don't belong here. This property is vacant and you're being detained.
I'm on my own porch, officer. You have no probable cause. Step off my property.
I don't need a lecture. Show ID or I put you in cuffs.
You are violating the Fourth Amendment. Call your supervisor, now.
That's enough. You're under arrest.
Officer Brody Vance had been with the Oak Creek Police Department for just over 4 years when he made the decision that would implode his career and cost the city's taxpayers a staggering $3.2 million. He was 28 years old, physically imposing, and possessed a dangerous combination of limited life experience and absolute certainty in his own authority. On a bright, sun-drenched Tuesday morning in late April, he received a dispatch call regarding a suspicious individual on the porch of a high-value property in the historic district. The individual in question was the Honorable Marcus Sterling, a 64-year-old federal circuit court judge and a lifelong scholar of civil rights law. Judge Sterling was sitting on his own front porch enjoying a cup of Earl Grey tea and reviewing a stack of appellate briefs. What Vance did next, ignoring property laws, escalating a calm conversation into a physical altercation, and dragging a federal judge off his own property in handcuffs, would become a definitive case study in how implicit bias rots the foundation of law enforcement. Before we get into the details of this catastrophic failure of judgment, where are you tuning in from? If you believe that a man's home is his castle and that the Constitution applies to everyone, please hit that subscribe button. Your engagement helps us shine a light on these injustices. The historic district of Oak Creek is the kind of neighborhood that real estate agents describe as stately. It is a grid of wide, tree-lined avenues where 100-year-old oaks cast dappled shadows over manicured fescue lawns. The houses are architectural treasures, colonials, Tudors, and Victorians, set far back from the street, radiating an aura of generational wealth and quiet power. It was 11:15 a.m. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of blooming azaleas and fresh mulch. The neighborhood was mostly quiet, save for the distant hum of leaf blowers from a landscaping crew working 2 houses down. It was the picture of suburban tranquility, a place where people moved to escape the noise and friction of the city. Judge Marcus Sterling had purchased the sprawling brick Georgian revival on Elm Street just 3 weeks prior. At 64 years old, Sterling was a man of immense gravity. He stood 6'2" with close-cropped salt and pepper hair and a posture that had been stiffened by decades of sitting on the bench. He had spent 35 years in the legal profession, first as a civil rights attorney fighting discriminatory housing practices in the 1980s, then as a prosecutor who went after corruption in City Hall, and finally for the last 15 years as a federal judge known for his piercing intellect and zero-tolerance policy for procedural errors. His colleagues described him as a legal titan. His clerks called him terrifying but fair. To Marcus Sterling, the law was not just a job. It was the structure that held civilization together. That Tuesday morning, Sterling was officially on vacation, though men like him never truly stopped working. He was dressed for comfort, but still maintained a standard of dignity that was non-negotiable for him. Pressed khaki trousers, a crisp navy blue polo shirt, and polished loafers. He sat in a wicker chair on his broad front porch, a thick binder of case files open on his lap, a pair of reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't lurking. He was the owner of the house, enjoying the fruits of a lifetime of hard labor. He had spoken to no one that morning. He had simply walked out his front door, sat down, and began to read. But in the eyes of one neighbor, Marcus Sterling's presence was a disruption to the visual order of the neighborhood. Brenda Higgins lived directly across the street. At 55 years old, Brenda considered herself the unofficial guardian of Elm Street. She spent her mornings in her sunroom ostensibly reading magazines, but primarily monitoring the street through the slats of her plantation shutters. She knew the rhythm of the neighborhood who left for work at 8:00, whose dog barked at the mail carrier, which landscaping service came on Thursdays. When she looked out her window and saw a black man sitting comfortably on the porch of the empty brick house, the one the real estate agent said had been sold to a very quiet older couple, Her mind immediately rejected the reality before her eyes. In Brenda's world, people like Marcus Sterling didn't buy houses on Elm Street. In her mind, the for sale sign had been taken down, but she hadn't seen a moving truck yet. Therefore, the house was empty. Therefore, the man on the porch was an intruder. She watched him for 5 minutes, waiting for him to get up and leave, waiting for him to pick up a package and run, waiting for him to do something criminal. But Sterling just turned a page in his binder and took a sip of tea. To Brenda, this brazen comfort was even more suspicious. It suggested he felt he had a right to be there. She picked up her phone, her fingers trembling with a mix of anxiety and self-righteousness, and dialed the non-emergency police line. "I need to report a suspicious person," Brenda said, her voice lowered, as if the man across the street could hear her through the brick and glass. "There's a man sitting on the porch of the empty house at 410 Elm Street. He's just sitting there going through papers. He doesn't live there. I know the owners haven't moved in yet." The dispatcher asked the standard questions. "Is he trying to break in? Is he aggressive?" "No," Brenda admitted, squinting through the blinds. "He's just sitting there, but he doesn't look like he belongs here. He's been there for 20 minutes. I think he might be scouting the place or squatting. You know how squatters are these days. They take over empty houses." "Does he have any weapons? Is he threatening anyone?" "I don't see a weapon," Brenda said. "But he's a big man, and he's staring at the house. It's making me very uncomfortable. We have a lot of older folks in this neighborhood." The call was logged. A suspicious person possible trespass call was broadcast to patrol units in District 4. Officer Brody Vance, patrolling just a mile away, picked up the radio. "Unit 4 Alpha, I'll take the call at 410 Elm." Brody Vance had a reputation in the department, and it wasn't the kind that leads to promotions. In his 4 years on the force, he had accumulated 9 citizen complaints. 6 of them involved discourtesy or unprofessional conduct, and 3 involved allegations of racial profiling. His supervisors had noted in his file that Vance had a proactive policing style that often bordered on aggression. He viewed himself as a soldier in a war zone, not a peacekeeper in a community. He believed that his gut instinct was superior to constitutional nuances. When he heard the dispatcher's description, "Subject is a black male, approximately 60s, loitering on the porch of a vacant residence," Vance's mind locked onto a narrative. Squatter. Drifter. Someone looking for an easy target. He didn't consider that the house might have been sold. He didn't consider that a squatter wouldn't be wearing pressed khakis and reading legal briefs in broad daylight. He only considered the location and the race of the subject. He turned his cruiser toward Elm Street, his pulse quickening with the anticipation of conflict. "Do you think officers with a history of bias complaints should be allowed to patrol alone? Let us know in the comments below." Officer Vance pulled his cruiser up to the curb in front of 410 Elm Street at 11:23 a.m. He didn't park down the street to observe. He parked directly in front of the walkway, asserting his presence. He stepped out of the vehicle, adjusting his utility belt, his hand resting instinctively near his holster. He scanned the property. The lawn was freshly cut. There were no broken windows, no overgrown weeds, no signs of abandonment. A small sold rider hung from the wooden real estate post near the sidewalk, though the main sign had been removed. Vance ignored it. His eyes were fixed on the man on the porch. Judge Sterling heard the car door slam. He didn't look up immediately. He was in the middle of a complex paragraph regarding the admissibility of hearsay evidence. He finished the sentence, marked the page with a yellow highlighter, and then slowly raised his head. He saw a young, stocky police officer striding up his walkway, not on the sidewalk, but cutting across his grass. Sterling frowned. He respected law enforcement. He had worked with them for decades, but he also respected boundaries. Vance marched up the steps of the porch, stopping 6 feet from where Sterling sat. He didn't say, "Good morning." He didn't ask, "Do you live here?" He crossed his arms over his chest, his stance wide and aggressive. "What are you doing here?" Vance demanded, his voice projecting loud enough for Brenda Higgins to hear from her window across the street. Sterling looked the officer over, noting the nameplate B. Vance and the lack of a sergeant's stripes. He took a calm breath. "I am reading." Sterling set his voice a deep, resonant baritone that had silenced courtrooms for 30 years. "Can I help you, officer?" "We got a call about a suspicious person trespassing on this property," Vance said, stepping closer. "You don't live here. This house is vacant." Sterling closed his binder slowly, placing it on the small table next to his tea. "That information is incorrect. This house is occupied. By me." Vance scoffed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "Right. And I'm the police chief. Look, buddy, we know the owners haven't moved in yet. Neighbors know who belongs here and who doesn't. You need to pack up your little papers and move along before I write you up for trespassing." Sterling's eyes narrowed slightly behind his reading glasses. "I'm not going anywhere. I purchased this home on the 4th of this month. The deed is recorded with the county clerk. I am on my own private property, and I have done nothing to warrant police intervention." "You got some ID that proves that?" Vance snapped. "Let me see a driver's license with this address on it." "My license still reflects my previous address, as I have legally 30 days to update it," Sterling replied calmly. "However, I am under no obligation to provide you with identification while sitting on my own front porch unless you can articulate a reasonable suspicion that I have committed, am committing, or am about to commit a crime. Sitting while black is not a crime, Officer Vance." Vance's face flushed a deep shade of red. This was the trigger. He wasn't used to suspects quoting the law at him. He was used to fear. He was used to compliance. To him, Sterling's knowledge wasn't a defense. It was defiance. It was a challenge to his authority. "Don't play lawyer with me," Vance warned, his hand dropping to his belt, unhooking the retention strap on his baton. "I don't care what you think you know. We have a report of trespassing. Until you prove you live here, you are a suspect. Now stand up and give me your ID, or we're going to have a problem." "The only problem here, officer, is your lack of probable cause," Sterling said, remaining seated. "You are currently violating the Fourth Amendment. You have entered private curtilage without a warrant and are attempting to detain a homeowner without reasonable suspicion. I suggest you return to your vehicle and call your supervisor before you make a mistake that you cannot undo." This is the moment where training should have kicked in. A seasoned officer would have paused. They would have noted the man's demeanor, his clothing, the specific legal terminology he was using. They would have called dispatch to check property records. But Brody Vance didn't see a homeowner. He saw a man who refused to submit. "Last warning," Vance barked, stepping onto the porch deck itself, towering over the seated judge. "Stand up. Hands where I can see them." "I am seated. My hands are visible," Sterling said, not moving a muscle. "I am asking you to leave my property." "That's it," Vance growled. He lunged forward, grabbing Sterling by the left arm. The contact was shocking. Sterling, despite his age, was a sturdy man, but he wasn't prepared for the violence of the grab. Vance yanked him upward. "You're under arrest for trespassing and resisting an officer." "Get your hands off me," Sterling shouted the command in his voice absolute. "You are assaulting a federal judge." "Yeah, sure you are," Vance sneered. He spun Sterling around, twisting the older man's arm behind his back with unnecessary force. Sterling winced as pain shot through his shoulder, an old rotator cuff injury flaring up instantly. He didn't fight back. He knew that any physical resistance would be used to justify further violence. He went limp, allowing Vance to manhandle him. Across the street, the landscaping crew had stopped their leaf blowers. The foreman, a man in his 40s, had pulled out his phone and was recording. He zoomed in as Vance shoved Sterling against the porch railing. "Stop resisting," Vance yelled for the benefit of the camera he hadn't noticed yet. "I am not resisting," Sterling stated clearly, his face pressed against the wood of his own porch column. "I am complying under duress. I am Judge Marcus Sterling of the United States Court of Appeals. You are making a grave error. Vance snapped the handcuffs onto Sterling's wrists. He tightened them aggressively, the metal biting into the skin. "You can tell the judge your stories in court," Vance mocked. "I am the judge." Sterling said, his voice low and dangerous. Vance ignored him. He hauled Sterling off the porch, marching him down the walkway that Sterling had paid to have power washed 3 days ago. Brenda Higgins watched from her window, a flicker of doubt finally entering her mind as she saw the criminal being led away in khakis and loafers. He didn't look like a squatter. He looked like a man whose dignity was being stolen. Vance shoved Sterling into the back of the patrol car. The space was cramped, the hard plastic seat unforgiving. Sterling's shoulder throbbed. He took a deep breath, closing his eyes for a second to center himself. He began to mentally catalog everything: the time of day, the officer's badge number, the lack of Miranda warnings, the excessive force, the failure to investigate. He wasn't just a victim anymore. He was a jurist building a case. "You're going to regret this," Vance said as he slammed the door. "You have no idea," Sterling whispered to the empty air of the back seat. The drive to the precinct took 15 minutes. Vance played loud rock music on the radio, a petty power move designed to humiliate his prisoner. Sterling sat in silence, staring out the window at the neighborhood he had worked his entire life to afford, watching it blur past through the cage of a police cruiser. When they arrived at the Oak Creek precinct, Vance pulled into the Sallyport with a flourish. He hauled Sterling out of the car, gripping his arm like a trophy. He marched him through the heavy steel doors and into the booking area. The desk sergeant that morning was Thomas O'Malley, a 58-year-old veteran who was 6 months away from retirement. O'Malley had spent his entire career in Oak Creek. He knew every street, every frequent flyer, and every judge in the county. He was drinking coffee and filling out a roster when the door opened. "Got a trespasser from Elm Street," Vance announced proudly, pushing Sterling toward the counter. "Refused to ID, resisted arrest. Claimed he was a federal judge or something." O'Malley looked up. He squinted. Then his eyes went wide. The coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. He stood up slowly, the color draining from his face. "Vance?" O'Malley said, his voice trembling slightly. "What did you do?" "I told you, caught him squatting at 410 Elm. Guy gave me attitude." O'Malley looked at Marcus Sterling. He looked at the handcuffs. He looked back at Sterling's face, a face he had seen in the newspaper countless times, a face he had seen at the annual law enforcement gala, a face that commanded respect across the entire state. "Good morning, Sergeant O'Malley," Sterling said calmly, though his voice was tight with pain. "I believe Officer Vance here has made a significant miscalculation." O'Malley came around the desk, moving faster than he had in years. "Vance, give me the keys. Now." "What, Sarge? He's a suspect. Give me the damn keys," O'Malley roared, snatching them from Vance's hand. He turned to Sterling. "Your Honor, I don't even know what to say. I am so sorry." Vance froze. "Your Honor." O'Malley unlocked the cuffs with shaking hands. "Vance, you idiot. You just arrested Judge Marcus Sterling. He's a federal circuit court judge. He's the man who put away the entire corrupt city council in 2005. Jesus Christ, Vance." Vance stared at Sterling. The man rubbed his wrists, looking at the red indentations. The arrogance evaporated from Vance's face, replaced by a cold, sickening dread. "I told you," Sterling said, his voice icy. "I told you to verify. I told you I was the homeowner. I told you who I was. You chose not to listen because you didn't like what you saw." I didn't know," Vance stammered. "You didn't show ID." "I was on my porch," Sterling said, stepping closer to Vance, his physical presence suddenly filling the room. "I don't need ID to sit on my porch, but you needed probable cause to arrest me, and you had none. Only bias." O'Malley was already on the phone. "Get the chief down here, now. And the captain. Yes, it's an emergency, a code red emergency." Within 20 minutes, Police Chief Robert Miller was in the booking room, breathless, and looking like he was about to have a stroke. He had known Sterling for 20 years. Judge Sterling, Miller said, extending a hand that Sterling did not shake. There are no words. This is a catastrophe. Are you injured? Do we need a medic? My shoulder is injured, Sterling said, but my civil rights have been battered far worse. We will drop all charges immediately, Miller said. We will expunge the arrest record. Officer Vance will be suspended pending an investigation. Please let us drive you home. I will not be driven home in a police car, Sterling said. My wife is on her way. And, Chief Miller, do not expunge the record yet. I want that arrest report preserved. I want the body camera footage preserved. I want the dispatch logs preserved. Preserved? For what? Vance asked, his voice small. Sterling turned to the young officer one last time. For the lawsuit, Officer Vance, and for your termination hearing. Should officers be personally liable for civil rights violations, or should the city pay? Tell us your thoughts below. The video hit the internet 3 days later. The landscaper who had filmed the arrest had uploaded it to social media with the caption, "Cop attacks old man on his own porch for reading." It went viral within hours. Millions of views. The image of a white officer dragging a well-dressed black man off the porch of a mansion was visually arresting. But when the news broke that the man was a federal judge, the story became a national firestorm. Headlines screamed, "Judge arrested for reading while black." Civil rights legend handcuffed at home. The lawsuit was filed 2 weeks later. It was a masterpiece of legal drafting written by Sterling himself with the assistance of a top civil rights firm. Sterling v. City of Oak Creek, Officer Brody Vance et al. The suit alleged false imprisonment, assault, and battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of civil rights under 42 U.S.C. Sector 1983. The complaint detailed the history of Officer Vance, the 9 prior complaints that the department had ignored. It named Brenda Higgins for making a false police report based on racial bias. It named the chief of police for failure to supervise. This is not about money, Sterling said in a press conference, his arm in a sling. This is about the fact that if I, a federal judge with 35 years of service to the law, cannot sit on my own porch without being treated like a criminal, then no one is safe. If my knowledge of the Constitution is treated as resistance, then we have lost the rule of law. The city's lawyers took one look at the body camera footage where Vance explicitly ignored Sterling's claim of ownership and mocked his status and told the city council to settle. There was no defense. Vance had violated every protocol in the book. The settlement was reached in record time, $3.2 million. It was one of the largest payouts for a single arrest in the state's history. But the money wasn't the end of it. Officer Brody Vance was fired 4 weeks after the incident. The internal affairs investigation was blistering. It found that Vance had instigated a confrontation without legal basis and demonstrated a profound lack of judgment and evident racial bias. He was stripped of his certification, meaning he could never work as a police officer in the state again. At 28, his career in law enforcement was over. Brenda Higgins, the neighbor, faced a different kind of justice. She wasn't arrested, but she was named in the lawsuit and eventually settled for an undisclosed amount to avoid a public trial. But the social cost was higher. The neighborhood she tried so hard to protect turned on her. Neighbors stopped waving. She was removed from the homeowners association board. She eventually sold her house and moved away, unable to bear the shame of being the woman who called the cops on the judge. 6 months later, Judge Sterling sat on his porch again. The weather was cooler now, the leaves on the oak trees turning a deep russet. His shoulder had healed, though it still ached when it rained. He had the same binder on his lap. He had the same cup of tea. The street was quiet. A patrol car drove by a different officer driving slowly. The officer looked at the house, saw the judge on the porch, and gave a respectful nod. Sterling nodded back. It was a victory, but a heavy one. He thought about the young men who had stood before his benchmen, who looked like him but didn't have his title, his money, or his knowledge of the law. He thought about what happened to them when they met an Officer Vance. They didn't get $3.2 million settlements. They got criminal records. They got prison time. Sometimes they got graves. The silence on the porch was peaceful, but it was fragile. Judge Sterling opened his binder and went back to work. There was still so much to do. This story forces us to ask a hard question. In a society built on laws, why does bias so often overrule them? If a federal judge isn't safe in his own home, who is? It's a reminder that we must demand not just better training, but better hearts in those we trust with a badge. We hope you enjoyed this story. If you believe in justice and accountability, please like this video and share it with your friends. And don't forget to leave a comment. What would you have done if you were in the judge's shoes? Stay safe, and we'll see you in the next one.
Ma'am, hang up the phone. You're causing a disturbance and you don't belong here.
I live here. I am a senior clerk for the state Supreme Court, and you are interrupting state business.
I don't care who you claim to be. Stand up. You're being detained. Now.
Detained for what? Sitting in my own courtyard while black...
Officer Derek Vance had 6 years of service with the Atlanta Police Department when he made the decision that would cost the taxpayers $950,000 and permanently dismantle his own livelihood. He was 32 years old, a man who walked with the heavy, deliberate stride of someone who believed his authority was absolute and his intuition flawless. He had cultivated a reputation in his precinct as a proactive enforcer, the kind of officer who didn't wait for trouble to find him. But on a bright, unseasonably warm Tuesday afternoon in October, Derek Vance wasn't looking for a criminal. He was looking for validation of a bias he didn't even realize he held. He was about to confront a woman who knew the law better than he knew the streets, a woman whose daily responsibilities involved interpreting the very statutes Vance was about to violate. Elena Ross was 46 years old, a woman of grace and formidable intellect, serving as the senior clerk for the state Supreme Court. She was a legal scholar, a gatekeeper for the highest judicial body in the state, and a woman who had spent 2 decades earning the respect of judges and attorneys alike. Before we unravel how a simple noise complaint spiraled into a civil rights catastrophe. Where are you tuning in from? If you believe that badge and uniform should never be a shield for prejudice, please hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us document these injustices and demand the accountability that is so often lacking. The Avery stands as a testament to modern luxury in the Buckhead district of Atlanta. It is a fortress of glass and steel featuring manicured gardens, a private saltwater pool, and a courtyard designed for the quiet contemplation of its affluent residents. It is the sort of place where privacy is the most expensive amenity. At 2:00 p.m., the courtyard was largely empty, save for the gentle rustle of ornamental grasses and the distant hum of the city. Elena Ross had lived in the Avery for 3 years. She sat at a wrought iron table in the shade of a pergola, her workspace meticulously arranged a laptop, a stack of case files bound in red tape, and a notepad. She was dressed for the weather, but appropriately for her station, wearing a tailored linen blouse and dark slacks. She was in the middle of a remote workday, reviewing a complex brief regarding municipal zoning laws. To any objective observer, she was the picture of professional focus. But objectivity was in short supply that afternoon. Elena had taken a call from an associate justice of the Supreme Court. It was a high-level discussion regarding a dissenting opinion they were drafting. Her voice was animated but modulated the tone of 2 colleagues debating the finer points of constitutional law. She laughed once, a warm, rich sound in response to a dry witticism from the judge. She was in her home, in her courtyard, doing her job. She had no reason to suspect that her presence was being scrutinized from a 3rd-floor balcony by a woman who saw not a neighbor, but an intruder. Julianne Thorne had moved into the Avery only 2 months prior. At 34 years old, she was the wife of a successful software developer, a woman who wore her residency in the building like a badge of moral superiority. Julianne spent her days managing the minutiae of her social calendar and increasingly monitoring the comings and goings of the building's inhabitants. She had appointed herself the unofficial guardian of the community's standards, a role no one had asked her to fill. From her vantage point on the balcony, Julianne looked down and saw Elena. She didn't see a senior court clerk. She didn't see a neighbor. She saw a black woman sitting in the courtyard speaking loudly in Julianne's estimation and taking up space that Julianne felt should be reserved for actual residents. Julianne watched for 10 minutes. The fact that Elena was comfortable that she had paperwork spread out that she was laughing irked Julianne in a way she couldn't articulate without revealing the ugly roots of her discomfort. In Julianne's mind, the equation was simple. The Avery was exclusive. Therefore, this woman who did not look like Julianne or her friends must not belong. Perhaps she was a nanny taking a break. Perhaps she was someone who had slipped in through a propped gate. When Elena laughed again, Julianne decided that the noise was unbearable. She didn't call the concierge. She didn't call building security. She picked up her phone and dialed 911. "I need an officer at the Avery on Peachtree Road." Julianne said, her voice trembling with a manufactured fear she had perfected over years of getting her way. "There's a woman in the private courtyard. She's shouting on her phone, pacing around, and she's looking up at the balconies. I don't recognize her. She's making me feel very unsafe. It looks like she might be on drugs or having a mental episode." The dispatcher asked the standard questions. Was she armed? No. Was she violent? "She's being aggressive verbally." Julianne lied, watching Elena calmly make a note in her ledger. "Just send someone before she attacks a resident. She clearly doesn't live here." The call was dispatched as a suspicious person causing a disturbance. Officer Derek Vance was 3 blocks away idling in his cruiser when the call came across his computer terminal. He read the notes. Suspicious female shouting, possibly intoxicated, refusing to leave per complainant. His mind immediately began to construct a narrative. He pictured a transient who had wandered in from the street, or perhaps a disgruntled former employee causing a scene. He did not picture a state Supreme Court clerk discussing case law. Vance had a history of jumping to conclusions. His personnel file contained 7 previous complaints, mostly for discourtesy and unnecessary escalation. He was known among his peers as a hard charger, a euphemism for an officer who preferred force to diplomacy. Vance pulled his cruiser up to the curb of the Avery at 2:14 p.m. He bypassed the front desk entirely. The gates to the courtyard were accessible via a side maintenance path that was currently unlocked for landscapers. A more prudent officer would have checked with the concierge to verify residency. Vance, however, trusted his instincts, and his instincts told him that he was walking into a confrontation with a trespasser. He adjusted his utility belt, squared his shoulders, and marched into the courtyard. The sun was bright, casting long shadows across the stone pavers. He scanned the area and locked eyes on Elena Ross. She was the only person there. She was still on the phone, her back slightly turned to him. Vance didn't see the expensive laptop. He didn't notice the high-quality linen of her clothes. He saw a black woman in a space he subconsciously coded as white and wealthy, and the narrative was set. He walked up behind her, his boots heavy on the stone. Elena was deep in conversation. "Justice, I believe the precedent in State v. Miller actually supports the defendant's claim regarding the search warrant," she was saying. Vance didn't wait for her to finish. "Ma'am, hang up the phone." Vance barked, his voice booming across the quiet courtyard. Elena turned, startled. She saw a police officer standing 5 feet away, his hand resting near his holster, his face a mask of aggression. She held up a finger, signaling for a moment. "I apologize, Justice. I have a police officer interrupting me. Please hold one moment." She lowered the phone but did not end the call. She looked at Vance with a mixture of confusion and annoyance. "Officer, can I help you? I am in the middle of a work call." "I said hang up the phone," Vance repeated, stepping closer, invading her personal space. "We have reports of a disturbance. You need to identify yourself and explain why you're on this property." Elena frowned. The accusation was absurd. A disturbance. I'm sitting here working. I live in this building, officer, and I am not going to hang up on a justice of the state Supreme Court because you stormed in here without assessing the situation. Vance's eyes narrowed. He heard the words Supreme Court, but he didn't process them. To him, it sounded like the kind of grandiose lie people told when they were caught. Justice of the Supreme Court, right? And I'm the governor. Look, lady, I don't care who you think you're talking to. You're trespassing. I have a witness stating you're screaming and acting erratically. Now, for the last time, put the phone down and stand up. Elena remained seated. She had spent 20 years in the legal system. She knew her rights, and she knew exactly where this officer was overstepping. I am not trespassing, she said, her voice steady and steel-hard. I am a resident of Unit 404. My key fob is on the table. My identification is in my bag. I am not shouting. I am conducting state business. You are the one creating a disturbance. This was the moment where Officer Vance could have paused. He could have looked at the key fob. He could have asked to see the ID calmly. But Derek Vance did not like being corrected, especially not by someone he had already categorized as a suspect. Her confidence didn't read as innocence to him. It read as defiance. It read as a challenge to his authority. I'm not going to ask you again, Vance said, unclipping his radio. Stand up. You are detained for investigation of trespassing and disorderly conduct. Detained? Elena's eyes flashed. On what reasonable suspicion, being a black woman sitting in a courtyard? This is harassment, officer. I strongly suggest you reconsider your tone and your actions immediately. You want to talk about the law? Vance sneered, stepping forward and grabbing her left arm. We can talk about it in the back of the car. Stand up. He yanked her arm. Do not touch me. Elena pulled her arm back, her composure cracking under the physical assault. You have no right to touch me. I am showing you my identification right now. She reached for her tote bag on the chair next to her. Don't reach! Vance shouted, his hand dropping to his taser. Hands where I can see them. Elena froze her hands, raised slightly, palms out. My credentials are in the bag. My badge is in the bag. I am the senior clerk for the Supreme Court. Check the bag. Vance grabbed the bag himself, upending it onto the table. A wallet, a phone charger, and a leather case tumbled out. The leather case fell open, revealing the heavy gold badge and the laminated identification card of the state judiciary. Eleanor Ross, senior clerk, State Supreme Court. Vance looked at it. The sun glinted off the metal. There, Elena said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. Now you see who I am. Call your supervisor. Vance stared at the badge. His brain stuttered. It looked real. It felt real. But the cognitive dissonance was too strong. He had already decided she was a vagrant causing trouble. If he admitted this was real, he had just assaulted a high-ranking court official. His ego scrambled for a defense mechanism, and it found one. It must be fake. You think I'm stupid? Vance scoffed, tossing the badge back onto the table with a clatter. Anyone can buy a badge online. I've seen better fakes at a pawn shop. Impersonating a public official is a felony. Now you're really in trouble. Elena stared at him in disbelief. Are you insane? Look at the hologram. Call the number on the back. You are making a career-ending mistake. The only mistake was you thinking you could pull this off here, Vance said. He grabbed her wrist again, this time twisting it behind her back with excessive force. Elena gasped in pain, the phone slipping from her other hand and clattering to the stones. You are under arrest for trespassing, disorderly conduct, and impersonating an officer. I am not impersonating an officer. Elena shouted, the pain in her shoulder sharp and burning. I am a clerk of the court. You are violating my civil rights. Get your hands off me. By now, the commotion had drawn attention. A young couple on a first-floor balcony had stepped out. A man walking his dog on the other side of the fence had stopped. Phones were coming out. The lens of accountability was focusing on Officer Vance, but he was too deep in his tunnel vision to care. "Stop resisting!" Vance yelled for the benefit of the cameras he didn't see. He forced Elena's other arm back. She wasn't resisting. She was flinching from the pain of his grip. "I am complying," Elena cried out, utilizing the language she knew was necessary for the record. "I am not resisting. I am in pain. You are hurting my shoulder. I am informing you that I have a pre-existing rotator cuff injury. You are using excessive force." Vance snapped the handcuffs onto her wrists. He ratcheted them tight, too tight. The metal bit into the soft skin of her wrists. "You should have thought about that before you started screaming at residents," Vance muttered, pushing her forward against the table. "I wasn't screaming at anyone," Elena said, her face pressed against the warm stone of the table. "My name is Elena Ross. I live in Unit 404. My residency can be verified by the concierge. Why have you not checked with the concierge?" "I don't need to check with anyone. I have a victim statement," Vance said, hauling her upright. At that moment, the building manager, a man named Robert, came sprinting out of the rear lobby doors. He had seen the police car and then the commotion on the security monitors. "Whoa, whoa, officer, stop!" Robert yelled, waving his hands. "What are you doing? That's Ms. Ross." Vance paused, looking at the manager. "Stay back, sir. This subject is under arrest." "Subject?" Robert looked from Vance to Elena, horror on his face. "That is a tenant. She's lived here for 3 years. She's on the board of the HOA. You are arresting a resident." Elena looked at Robert, her eyes watering from the pain but her dignity intact. "Robert, please record this interaction. He has refused to verify my identity. He has refused to look at my lease agreement. He claims my Supreme Court credentials are fake." "They're fake, Robert," Vance said dismissively to the manager. "She's got a toy badge. She's coming with me." "Officer, listen to me," Robert pleaded, stepping closer but keeping his hands visible. "I am the property manager. I am telling you officially she has a right to be here. She is not trespassing. If you take her, you are kidnapping a resident." Vance hesitated. The seed of doubt was finally planted, but the handcuffs were already on. In his mind, unarresting her now would look like weakness. It would be an admission of error, and Derek Vance did not make errors. He doubled down. "She failed to follow lawful commands. She resisted detention. We'll sort out the residency at the station. Back off or you'll be joining her for obstruction." Vance shoved Elena forward, marching her toward the gate. She walked with her head high despite the humiliation of being paraded through her own home in shackles. She saw Julianne Thorne on the balcony, watching with a hand over her mouth, perhaps finally realizing that the threat she called in was being treated like a hardened criminal. "Officer Vance," Elena said quietly as they reached the cruiser. "My badge number is 004. The justice I was speaking to is Justice Samuel Holloway. He heard you assault me. He heard you refuse to identify yourself. When we get to the station, I want you to remember that I gave you every opportunity to stop this." "Get in the car," Vance growled, pushing her head down as he shoved her into the cramped back seat. He slammed the door, sealing her in. He walked around to the driver's side, heart pounding, adrenaline masking the creeping dread that he might have just stepped off a cliff. The ride to the precinct was a tense, silent 12 minutes. Vance glanced in his rearview mirror. Elena was sitting perfectly still, eyes closed, breathing deeply. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging. She was meditating on the destruction of his career. Vance turned up the radio to drown out the silence, but the static only amplified his anxiety. They arrived at the North Precinct. Vance pulled into the Sally Port, extracted Elena from the back, and walked her into the processing area. The intake room was busy. Officers were booking a shoplifter. Another was typing a report. The desk sergeant was Thomas Miller, a 55-year-old veteran with 30 years on the job. He was a man who had seen everything, a man who knew the difference between a criminal and a mistake. He looked up over his reading glasses as Vance walked in with a well-dressed woman in handcuffs. "What do we have, Vance?" Sergeant Miller asked, his tone neutral. Trespassing at the Avery, disorderly conduct, impersonating a public official. Vance recited, placing Elena's bag and the loose items he'd confiscated on the high counter. Miller frowned. He looked at Elena. She stood tall, her wrists bruised against the steel cuffs. She looked him dead in the eye. "Sergeant," she said, her voice calm and authoritative, cutting through the noise of the room. "My name is Elena Ross. I am the senior clerk for the state Supreme Court. Officer Vance has arrested me in my own home, refused to verify my residency with the building manager, and dismissed my state-issued credentials as toys." The room went quiet. The officer booking the shoplifter stopped typing. Sergeant Miller stood up slowly. He looked at Vance, then down at the items on the counter. He reached out and picked up the leather case. He flipped it open. The gold badge shone under the fluorescent lights. He looked at the ID card. He felt the weight of the leather, the texture of the seal. He knew real credentials when he saw them. Miller looked at Vance. "Vance, did you call this in for verification?" "It looked fake, Sarge," Vance said, his voice losing its bravado. "She was shouting at people. She wouldn't hang up her phone." "I was speaking with Justice Holloway," Elena interjected, "regarding the State v. Miller dissent. I imagine the justice is currently trying to locate me." Sergeant Miller's face drained of color. He looked at the phone in the bag. As if on cue, it lit up. The caller ID read Justice Holloway Mobile. Miller didn't answer it. He looked at Vance with a mixture of pity and fury. "You arrested the Supreme Court clerk. You brought her into my house in cuffs." She resisted," Vance stammered. "Uncuff her," Miller barked. It wasn't a request. It was a command that shook the glass partitions. "Uncuff her right now." Vance fumbled for his keys. His hands were shaking. He stepped behind Elena and unlocked the cuffs. They fell away, revealing angry red welts on her wrists. Elena rubbed them slowly, never taking her eyes off Vance. "Ms. Ross," Sergeant Miller said, coming around the desk, "please come sit down. I am going to call the captain immediately. I need to apologize on behalf of this precinct. This is a catastrophic failure of procedure." "I don't want your apology, Sergeant," Elena said, her voice icy. "I want to file a formal complaint. I want photographs taken of my wrists. I want the body camera footage secured immediately. And I want to call Justice Holloway back before he sends the state troopers to find me." Miller nodded, handing her the phone. "Anything you need, ma'am. Vance, give me your badge and your gun. Go sit in the conference room. Do not speak to anyone." "Sarge, badge, gun, now." Miller's voice was low and dangerous. Vance unholstered his weapon. He unpinned his badge. He placed them on the counter next to Elena's credentials. The symbolism was stark. One badge represented the frantic, ego-driven misuse of power. The other represented the calm, enduring weight of the law. Vance walked to the conference room, a dead man walking. He knew it was over. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The video from the neighbors hit the internet before Elena had even left the station. The visual of a white officer manhandling a well-dressed black woman in a luxury courtyard, refusing to look at her ID, claiming her home wasn't hers, it was indefensible. The headline wrote itself, "Atlanta Officer Arrests Supreme Court Clerk for Living While Black." The lawsuit was filed within the week. It cited unlawful arrest, excessive force, false imprisonment, and violation of civil rights. The city attorney took one look at the body camera footage, specifically the moment Vance sneered at the authentic Supreme Court badge, and told the mayor to settle immediately. There was no defense. Vance had ignored the building manager. He had ignored the credentials. He had ignored common sense. The settlement was agreed upon at $950,000. It was a staggering sum for a noise complaint, but the damage to the city's reputation was incalculable. Derek Vance was terminated 3 weeks later. The internal affairs investigation was scathing. It found that Vance had violated 17 separate departmental policies. His certification was revoked by the state board, meaning he could never work in law enforcement again. At 32, his career was finished. He was left with nothing but the memory of his own arrogance. Julianne Thorne, the neighbor who made the call, did not escape unscathed. Elena Ross sued her for defamation and harassment. The lawsuit revealed a pattern of Julianne calling the police on minority residents. Under pressure from the Homeowners Association and facing a massive legal bill, Julianne and her husband were forced to sell their condo and move. The community she tried so hard to protect from Elena ultimately ejected her. But money and firings do not erase the memory of the handcuffs. Months later, Elena Ross sat in the same courtyard. It was quiet. The sun was shining. She was working. But the sense of safety was gone. She knew now that her education, her title, her expensive clothes, and her position as a pillar of the legal system were not enough to shield her. To Officer Vance, she had been just another body to be controlled. This story forces us to ask a difficult question. If a Supreme Court clerk cannot sit in her own home without being criminalized, who is safe? How many others who do not have a direct line to a justice or a badge in their purse have been dragged away in silence? Derek Vance paid with his career. The city paid with its budget. But Elena Ross paid with her peace of mind. And that is a debt that can never be fully reimbursed. Do you think officers should be personally liable for civil rights settlements? Let us know in the comments below. If this story moved you, please share it. We must keep the light shining on the truth. Thank you for watching.